The sign read Sunnyside in chipped paint, and beneath it she stood in borrowed shoes, holding a paper sack and a $10 bill that had to become a life. 18 years old. No people, no place. Behind her, a door clicked shut. Ahead, a road went two directions and neither belonged to her. She started walking toward the only sound she heard, peeping. 3 days earlier, the orphanage cook had pressed a biscuit into her hand and said something Mabel Boone would carry like a stone in her pocket. Nobody's worthless, child. Folks just stop looking close enough to see the worth. Mabel had nodded the way you nod when words go past you. She did not understand them yet. She understood hunger and cold and the click of a door. The rest of it, the looking close, would take a barn and 10 small lives to teach her. Mabel Boone had lived at Sunnyside her whole remembered life. She knew the smell of the radiators and the particular squeak of the third stair, and the way the matron counted heads at night like a woman tallying. Coins she resented spending. There had been other children, younger ones who got chosen. Mabel had not been the choosing kind. She was quiet in a way adults found unsettling, watchful, the sort of girl who noticed when a thing was broken before anyone else did and fixed it, without being asked. The rule was plain and old. At 18 you went. The state stopped paying and Sunnyside stopped keeping. On the morning of her birthday, the matron handed her a paper sack of clothes, 2 pairs of socks she'd darned herself, a comb, and a $10 bill folded into a hard little square. "This is more than some get," the matron said, and it was not unkind, only tired. "There's a town 4 miles east. You're a worker. You'll find something." Mabel did not cry. She had learned that crying was a thing you did alone. Later, where it cost nothing. She took the sack and the money and walked out under the chipped sign, and the door clicked behind her, and that click was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The road east ran past sorghum fields gone to stubble and fence lines sagging like old men. April in the Missouri bottoms was mud and green, and the smell of things waking up. She had no plan beyond her feet. She counted her steps to keep from counting other things. A mile on, she came to a crossroads with a feed store, a gas pump, and a hand-painted board out front. People milled around a tailgate where a man in a seed cap was selling chicks by the box, fuzzy and yellow and loud as a schoolyard. Children begged their mothers. Money changed hands. Mabel stopped at the edge of it, the way she stopped at the edge of everything, and watched. She had nowhere to be. She had 4 miles and a sack and a folded 10. She told herself she only wanted to hear the sound a minute, that warm electric peeping, because it was the opposite of a door clicking shut. She did not yet know that wanting to hear a sound a minute longer was the first time in her life she had wanted something just because it was alive. She edged closer. The man in the seed cap was about to dump a small box into a feed bucket. Inside it 10 chicks stumbled and bumped and circled, peeping in a frantic knot, climbing over one another and finding nothing. "Cull box," he said when he caught her looking. Eyes never opened right. Blind, the whole lot. "Can't sell 'em, can't keep 'em. Hatchery says drown the culls, but I ain't got the stomach before lunch." He set the bucket down. "You want a sad story, or you want to buy good ones? Got reds, got buffs, $1 apiece." Mabel looked at the 10 blind chicks climbing over each other in the dark they couldn't get out of. She knew that box. She had lived in that box her whole life. "How much for those?" she said. Her voice surprised her. "The ones nobody wants." The man laughed. "Those? Those are free." "Free," she repeated, like the word might mean something different the second time. "Free," the man said. "Take 'em or I'll do what the hatchery says." He squinted at her, taking in the paper sack, the borrowed shoes, the way she stood like someone with no porch to stand on. His face changed, gentled some. "You got a brooder? A lamp? Feed? Place to keep 'em warm and dark away from cats and cold. 'Cause blind chicks ain't a free thing, miss. They're free to take and dear to keep. They can't find feed, can't find water, can't get out from underfoot of the others. You'll be hand-feeding 10 birds that can't see to eat, every few hours, day and night, and most of 'em will die on you anyhow. That's the truth of it." Mabel stood very still. Every reasonable thing she had ever learned lined up in her head and spoke at once. She had $10. She had no roof. She had 4 miles to a town that might not want her either, and a sack of socks and one biscuit going stale. A person with nothing did not take on 10 lives that could not see. A person with nothing kept walking, found work, found a bed, became solid before she became responsible for anything. That was sense, that was survival. The matron would have said it. Anyone would have said it. But she kept looking at the box. She knew, with a knowing that came from below her thoughts, exactly what it felt like to be in a dark you didn't choose, climbing over others, peeping at a world that had decided you weren't worth the trouble. She knew what it was to be a cull, to be the one not chosen, year after year, while the bright easy ones went off in somebody's arms. If she walked away, the man would do what he'd said, quick and then forgotten. 10 small lives gone before lunch because their eyes had come out wrong through no fault of anything they'd done. She thought about the cook's words she didn't understand. Folks just stopped looking close enough to see the worth. Maybe nobody had ever looked close at her, either. Maybe that was the whole of it. I don't have a lamp, she said slowly, or feed, or any place yet, she swallowed. But I've got $10, and I expect a lamp and feed cost most of it. The man studied her a long moment. Something passed between them that neither named. Reckon they would, he said quietly. Reckon they just about would. So she spent it. A second-hand heat lamp from a dusty shelf for $4, a small bag of chick starter for 2, a tin waterer for 1, and a cardboard box the man threw in for nothing along with a roll of advice she tried to memorize. That left her $3 and 10 lives that could not see, and no place on earth to plug a lamp in. There's an old Hadley place, the man said, scratching his neck. Mile north, past the dead orchard. Nobody's farmed it in years. Barn's still standing, last I knew. Power might even be on at the pole. Bank's been too cheap to cut it. He shrugged. Ain't mine to give, but ain't nobody there to say no either. She picked up the box. The man's name was Earl Tibbets, and he would matter more than either of them guessed. As she balanced the box against her hip, he reached into the truck and came out with a paper bag, pressed it on her. 2 cold biscuits and a wedge of cheese. My wife packs more'n I eat, he said, which was a kindly lie. Hadley Place, north. You get those birds warm by dark. He paused. I run feed out that way Thursdays. I might could check the roads not washed out. For my own sake. It was the first time anyone had said I might come back and meant it. The Hadley place was exactly as forgotten as Earl had promised. The dead orchard came first, gray apple trees standing in rows like a congregation that had given up on the sermon, and past them a farmhouse with its windows gone to dark squares and its porch sagging at one corner. But the barn behind it stood square and stubborn, gray board and a tin roof streaked with rust, and when Mabel hauled the door along its track, it groaned and gave and let her into a dim space that smelled of old hay and dust and mice. It was dry. That was the first miracle. A whole corner of it was dry, where the roof held, and there was a workbench and a stall with sound walls and an outlet box screwed to a post with a frayed cord running up to the rafters. She set the chicks down and tried the lamp. For a long moment, nothing, and her heart went down into the borrowed shoes. Then she found the breaker in a rusted gray panel and threw it with the heel of her hand, and the bulb in the heat lamp bloomed a deep, warm red, and the dark, dry corner of the barn turned the color of the inside of a held hand. Mabel sat down in the straw and cried then, briefly, the way she'd taught herself, alone and later, and where it cost nothing. Then she stopped because she had work. The work was harder than anything she had ever done, and she had scrubbed floors since she was 7. Earl had told her the trick, but telling and doing were different countries. The chicks could not find the feed. They could not find the water. They peeped and stumbled and walked straight through the feed she scattered, climbed the little tin waterer and tipped it, knocked into the box walls and fell, and got up confused. The strong ones trampled the weak ones. 2 were already failing, listless, their peeping gone thin. So she fed them by hand, one at a time. She learned to cup a chick in her palm and dip its beak, just the tip, into the waterer until it felt the wet and drank, throwing its little head back the way they do. She learned to make a shallow to feed and tap it with her fingernail the way a hen taps, take Kate, and a chick would orient to the sound and peck at it, missing and then striking, and you could feel the exact moment it understood that pecking near the tapping meant food. She named the tapping. She did not name the chicks. Not yet. That felt like tempting something. But she named the tapping the calling, in her own head, and she did it 100 times that first night, dipping and tapping, until her back was a single bar of pain and the red light swam in her eyes. By midnight, 3 chicks could find the waterer if she set them in front of it. By the gray of morning, when the high windows went from black to pewter, all 8 of the living ones had eaten, and the 2 she'd thought lost were peeping with the rest. Thin but stubborn, she had lost none. She slept 2 hours in the straw with the box against her side and woke to peeping, and did it all again. The days folded into each other. She found a hand pump behind the house that gave rusty water and then clear. She found a root seltzer with 3 jars of green beans somebody had left, and she ate them slow, ashamed and grateful. She washed her 2 shirts in the horse trough and dried them on the orchard fence. The cheese and biscuits were gone by the 2nd day, the beans by the 5th. After that it was hard, and she did not let herself think about it during daylight, because thinking about it during daylight was how you stopped. But the chicks she could not stop thinking about, and that was the saving of her. Because they were learning. That was the thing nobody at the feed store had believed possible. Blind chicks, the man had said, can't find feed, can't find water. But hers could, now, because she had taught them another way to find it. They came to the tapping. They came to her footstep in the straw. When she said, "Here, here," in the low voice she used only for them, 8 downy bodies turned toward the sound of her like flowers turning, and stumbled toward her across the straw. And she would kneel and let them climb into the cup of her hands. They could not see her, but they knew her. They had learned to find the one thing in the dark that meant safety, and the one thing was her. They grew. That was the next thing the feed store certainties had not allowed for. Chicks that should have died in a bucket before lunch put on size and feather, and the comical adolescent ungainliness of half-grown birds, all leg and wing in outrage. Their down gave way to feathers, reds and buffs just like the ones the man had been selling for $1, except these had cost her everything and learned to live blind. She built them a run from orchard deadfall and a roll of wire she found rusting against the barn wall, and inside it she did a peculiar thing that came to her in the night. She made the world findable. If they could not see, then the world would have to be felt and heard. She laid flat creek stones in a path from the coop door to the feed, so their feet learned the cool, smooth road that meant breakfast. She hung a tin can with a pebble in it over the waterer, and gave it a flick each morning so the Shichikike taught the way to drink. She kept the feed always in the same corner, the water always in the same corner, never moved a thing, because for a creature without eyes, a moved thing is a betrayal. She talked to them constantly, a low-running creak of words, so they always knew where she was and where was safe. And the birds, who were supposed to be dead, thrived. They came when she called. They followed the stone path. They knew the tin can sound and the feed corner and the particular creak of the coop door that meant her. A neighbor passing on the road, had there been one, would have seen a thin girl in a too big shirt walking across a weedy yard with 8 chickens, streaming behind her in a line, stepping stone to stone, and would not have believed those birds could not see a thing. Earl came on Thursday, as he'd half promised. His truck nosed up the orchard track and he climbed out slow, taking in the run, the stone path, the birds. "Well, I'll be skinned," he said. He stood with his hands on his hips a long while. "They're all alive." 8, Mabel said. "Lost 2 the first night before I learned the way of it. The other 8 stuck." 8 blind chicks. He shook his head. I've raised poultry 40 years. I'd have told you that couldn't be done. They can't see the feed, Mabel said. So I made the feed something they could find another way. That's all it was. They're not stupid. They're not worthless. They just needed it put where they could reach it. Earl looked at her sharp then, and she felt she'd said more than she meant to, the way you do when you've been alone with your own voice too long. He started coming Thursdays for real after that. He brought feed and let her work it off helping load his truck at the store, which gave her a few dollars, and a reason that wasn't charity. He brought a sack of seed potatoes and showed her how to cut the eyes and plant them in the old garden plot behind the house, and she did, on her knees in the warming dirt, and things came up green in rows that were hers. He brought news, too, which she'd had none of. The Hadley place, he told her, had gone to the bank when old man Hadley passed without heirs. The bank had sat on it for years, too small to bother selling, too remote to develop. The taxes barely worth the paperwork. Nobody wants it, Earl said. 40 acres of rough ground, dead orchard. A house needs work, a barn. He said it like he was reading off the same cull box the chicks had come from. Nobody wants it, can't sell it, can't keep it. Mabel said nothing, but something turned over in her chest, slow, like a key. By June, she had 8 laying pullets that found their nests by feel and a stone path and a garden coming on, and a barn she'd swept clean in a corner she'd made into a kind of room, with a cot Earl's wife had sent, and a crate for a table and a jar of orchard flowers because flowers cost nothing and meant something. She woke to peeping and the smell of dirt and growing things. For the first time in her life, she woke somewhere she was glad to be. She knew it wasn't hers. She knew it on paper belonged to a bank in a town she'd never seen. But the birds were hers, and the path was hers, and the green rows were hers, and the work was hers. And she had begun, without letting herself say the word, to use another word in the privacy of her own head for the dry, warm corner of the barn. Home. She had started to think home. She came back from the garden one noon to find a car in the orchard track that was not Earl's truck. A clean sedan, town clean, and a man in a pressed shirt standing in her yard with a clipboard, frowning at the barn, the run, the stone path, the girl. "This is bank property," he said. "You're trespassing. Who are you?" Mabel set down her hoe. Behind her, the birds heard her footstep and came streaming to the wire, peeping, 8 of them in a hopeful line. The man looked at the blind chickens following a thin girl across a yard they'd made findable in the dark, and for one strange second his frown faltered, as if he too were seeing something he'd been told could not exist. Then he wrote something down. His name was Mr. Pruitt, and he was an asset manager for First Regional Bank, which meant, he explained, in the flat voice of a man who has explained many things to people who would rather he didn't, that it was his job to clear non-performing properties off the bank's books. The Hadley place had sat non-performing for 9 years. Now there was finally a buyer interested in the acreage, a man who ran cattle and wanted the rough ground for grazing, and Mr. Pruitt's job was to get the property vacant, clean, and closable by the end of summer. A squatter complicated that. "You can't just live here," he said, not cruelly, simply as fact. "I don't know how long you've been here or what your situation is, but this is the bank's land, and there's a sale moving forward, and you'll need to be gone. I'll give you 2 weeks out of courtesy. The structures and any livestock will need to be removed." "Removed where?" Mabel said. "That's not the bank's concern, I'm afraid." She stood in the yard she had swept and planted and made safe for blind things, and she heard the door of Sunnyside click shut all over again. 4 miles and 3 months ago, the same click, the same cold, the same nobody's concern. She had built a whole world in a dry corner, and the world was a thing that could be removed by a man with a clipboard who had never once tapped a fingernail against a feed lid in the dark. She did not cry. She had work, and besides, crying cost nothing, and she needed to spend on something that paid. When Earl came Thursday, she told him, and his face went still and then hard. He knew Pruitt. Everyone knew Pruitt. He knew the bank. He knew, too, the cattleman who wanted the ground, a big operator named Holcomb who'd been buying up the rough acres all along the bottoms cheap because nobody else wanted them. Nobody wants it. The phrase again. Holcomb's whole business was wanting what nobody else wanted, except that when Holcomb wanted it, it stopped being free. You got any claim at all? Earl asked. Any paper? She had a paper sack and 2 pairs of darned socks. She had no paper that counted. Then we'd best find you some, Earl said. But finding it was not simple, and the days that followed taught her how the cull box looked from inside a town. Earl drove her in to the county seat, and she sat in offices with her hands folded while clerks explained things in voices that slid off her like rain off the tin roof. There were forms, there were fees she couldn't pay. There was a thing called adverse possession that Earl had heard of, where if you lived on land and worked it open and notorious for long enough the law might let you keep it. But the long enough in Missouri was years and years, and she'd had months. And the bank had a sale moving and a buyer waiting. You're a minor as far as most of this goes, one clerk said, glancing at her, or near enough nobody'll sign with you. You got no money, no rental history, no employment of record. I'm sorry, Ann. There's just no hook to hang it on. No hook to hang it on. She was 18 and she did not exist in any way the town could file. Worse came. Pruitt, it turned out, had mentioned the squatter to the sheriff's office, just to paper his own trail. And word had gone around the way words do in a small county, and the version that traveled was not a thin girl raising blind chickens, but a vagrant living rough on bank land. Maybe trouble, maybe worse. People she passed in town looked at her sidelong. The feed store owner, not Earl but the man who held the lease, told Earl quietly that he'd as soon Earl not bring the girl around. It didn't look right. The bank did business there. Mabel stood at the edge of all of it, the way she always had, watching a world decide what she was worth without once looking close. The 2 weeks ticked. The garden ripened. The birds came to her call across a yard the bank had already sold out from under them all. Earl did not give up, and that was new to her, a person not giving up on her account. He made calls. He drove her to a legal aid office, 2 counties over, where a tired young lawyer listened to the whole story and rubbed his eyes and said the law was the law. The bank held title free and clear, and adverse possession needed far more time than she had. But he wrote a letter anyway, asking the bank for a hardship delay, and Mabel signed it in her careful orphanage hand, and they mailed it knowing it was a paper boat against a flood. Then Holcomb himself came out to look at his almost land. He came in a big truck and walked the acreage with Pruitt trailing him, and Mabel watched from the garden as the 2 men paced off the rough ground, Holcomb gesturing at the dead orchard, the fence lines talking grazing and water, and the price he'd beat the bank down to. He was not a cruel-looking man. He was a businessman looking at cheap dirt that would feed cattle, and the girl and her birds were simply not in the frame of what he saw, the way she had been not in the frame her whole life. He stopped at the run, though. The blind chickens heard the strange footstep and came anyway, hopeful, streaming down the stone path in their line, and Holcomb stood looking at them a while. "Those your birds?" he asked her. "Yes, sir. Something wrong with them?" "They're walking funny, following that path like it's a rail." "They're blind," Mabel said. "Hatched that way. Whole batch was meant to be culled. I taught them to find their feed and water by the path and the sound. They lay good, they don't waste." Holcomb frowned, not unkindly, the same faltering frown Pruitt had worn. "Blind chickens that lay," he said. "Ha!" Then he turned back to Pruitt and the price, and the moment closed, and Mabel understood that being briefly interesting was not the same as being worth keeping. She had learned that lesson in a building with a chipped sign. The legal aid letter came back. The bank regretted it could not delay. The sale was in the interest of the institution and its depositors. The occupant should vacate by the stated date or be removed. Removed, the word she'd had her whole life. Earl took it harder than she did. He sat on her crate table in the swept barn with his hat in his hands and said, "It wasn't right. A girl works ground, brings dead land back, does what nobody thought could be done. And the law's got no hook for that, but it's got plenty of hook for a cattleman with cash. He was angry on her behalf, and she sat with the unfamiliar warmth of that, a person angry for her, and did not know what to do with it. Earl, she said, you've done more than anybody ever. It's all right. It's not all right. No, she agreed. But you didn't have to, and you did. The night before the deadline, she walked the place by moonlight, the way the birds walked it, by feel. The stone path cool under her bare feet, the garden heavy with beans and the first tomatoes, the barn dry and warm, the orchard standing gray and patient. She had made a dead place live. She had taken the free thing nobody wanted and the worthless ground nobody wanted and put them together, and they had, between them, made something. And tomorrow a man with a clipboard would remove it, because the something she'd made did not show up on any paper, did not exist in any office, had no hook to hang on. She thought she had made peace with it. She had spent 18 years making peace with being removed. But that night, lying on the cot with 8 birds murmuring in the dark beside her, finding her by her breathing, the way they found everything by feel and faith, she discovered she had not made peace at all. She had only never had anything to lose before. Now she did, and losing it, she found, was a different and larger pain than never having had it, and she lay awake in the warm dark, and felt it fill her up to the brim. Morning came gray, Pruitt's sedan, and a county truck, and behind them Holcomb's big rig, come to walk his new ground. Pruitt had papers. The deadline was now. He stood in the yard and read aloud the language of removal while Mabel stood with her paper sack already packed. The same sack, the same socks, 8 birds boxed and peeping at her feet because she would not leave them, would carry them down the road to nothing again. She had $10 once. Now she had 8 blind chickens and a packed sack and a road going 2 directions and neither hers. She had come exactly back to where she started, except that now she knew precisely what she was losing, which was the whole cruelty of it. The door again clicking shut. She set the box down in the orchard track, in the gray light, and for a long moment she could not make her feet move toward the road. 8 blind birds peeped up at her from the box, trusting, oriented to her breath, waiting for the tap of her fingernail that meant the world was findable and safe. They did not know it was over. They thought, as much as a bird thinks, that she would set them down somewhere and make a path and call them. And there would be feed in the corner where feed always was. That was the thing that broke her, finally standing in the dead orchard with the men waiting. Not her own loss, theirs. She had taught 8 creatures that the dark could be trusted because she was in it, and now she was going to carry them out to a road that led nowhere and prove the dark could not be trusted after all. That she was just one more thing that left, one more door clicking shut, except this time she'd be the door. Nobody's worthless, the cook had said. Folks just stop looking close enough. But what good was being worth something, Mabel thought, if there was no one whose looking close enough actually counted? She had looked close at the birds. Earl had looked close at her. And it hadn't been enough, because the people who held the paper had never looked at all, and the paper was what the world ran on. She picked the box back up, and Holcomb, walking his new acreage, stopped out again at the empty run, at the stone path. He crouched and picked up one of the flat creek stones she'd laid, turned it in his big hand, and looked at the careful road of them running to a feeder that was findable in the dark. He looked a long time. Then he stood and walked back, past Pruitt, past his own truck, straight to where Mabel stood in the orchard with the box in her arms, and he said the thing that turned it, the thing that came not from the law or the paper, but from a man finally looking close. "Wait, wait," Holcomb said again, and Pruitt turned with his papers half-read. And Earl, who had pulled up behind the county truck and gotten out fast, stopped where he was. Holcomb held up the Flat Creek stone. "You laid these a path so the blind birds could find their feed." "Yes, sir, by feel. 'Cause they can't see it, so you made it so they don't need to." He turned stone over. "How many of these did you lay?" All of them, Mabel said, from the coop to the feeder and the coop to the water. 40, 50. I moved them till the spacing matched a bird's step. Then I never moved them again. You don't move things on something that can't see. You keep the world where they left it. Holcomb looked at her for a long moment, and it was not the faltering half-frown of before. It was the full attention of a man who has spent his life reading ground and stock and weather, looking at something he had finally recognized. I run 400 head, he said slowly, and I lose money every year on cattle that go bad-footed and blind-quartered in the back pasture, animals everybody tells me to cull and ship, because you can't manage stock that can't find its own way to water. I've shipped good animals for that. Money out the door. He nodded at the stone path. You're telling me a girl with no money and a free box of culls figured out how to run blind stock, to feed and water reliable, all summer, no losses by making the ground itself the guide. 8 birds, Mabel said. It's not 400 head. It's just chickens. It's the same thing, Holcomb said. It's exactly the same thing. It's the only thing. He looked at Pruitt. What's the bank want for this place? Pruitt blinked. Mr. Holcomb, we have an agreement in principle for the acreage for the grazing. I wanted the grass. I didn't want the house or the barn or the orchard. Those are just stuff I'd have to tear down. Holcomb's eyes came back to Mabel. What if I bought the whole parcel off the bank like we said, and the grass stays mine for cattle? But the house, the barn, the orchard, the garden, this run, he gestured at the made world, the swept barn, the green rows, that stays hers, and she works for me. Top hand wages. She manages the special needs stock, the blind quarters, the bad-footed, the ones I've been shipping at a loss. She makes the back pasture findable the way she made this yard. The orchard was very quiet. A bird peeped in the box. Pruitt found his voice. She's 18. She has no credit, no rental history. No, she'll have employment of record, Holcomb said. Mine, starting today. And she'll have a lease on the house and barn, signed by me once I hold the title. That's rental history and employment and a roof, all three, in one sentence. He looked almost amused. You want it vacant, clean, and closable, Pruitt. I'll close. And it'll be occupied by my own employee, which is my business, not the bank's. Write it up. Mabel stood holding the box of birds and could not speak. It was Earl who spoke, stepping forward, hat crushed in his hand. I'll witness it, he said, and I'll vouch for her. 40 years in this county, my word's worth something at the courthouse. She raised 8 blind chicks that every soul, including me, swore would die in a bucket. She brought a dead garden back. She swept a barn nobody'd opened in 9 years and made it a home. I'll put my name to every word of it. Holcomb nodded. There you go. A hook to hang it on. The phrase she'd heard in the Colt County office turned all the way around. It took the rest of the summer to make true on paper what had become true in a single morning in the orchard. Holcomb bought the parcel. The bank got its sale, and Pruitt got his closable file, and went away satisfied in the narrow way such men are satisfied. A lease was drawn, plain and fair, the house and barn, and the acre of garden and the orchard, hers to live in and tend, the grass his to graze. An employment record began, with wages that to Mabel seemed an impossible sum, paid for the work she would have done for nothing, making the world findable for animals that could not see it. And the work was real, and it was hers, and it was good. She walked Holcomb's back pasture that fall, and did for his cattle what she had done for her birds. She laid lanes of packed gravel from the bad-foot ground to the water tanks, so blind-quartered cattle could feel the road under their hooves. She hung bells at the gates, different tones at different gates, so the animals learned which sound meant which way. She kept the troughs always in the same place, never moved, because for a creature that cannot see, a moved thing is a betrayal, and an unmoved thing is a promise. Holcomb stopped shipping animals he'd once written off. The ones everyone said to cull lived and grazed and put on weight. And the numbers at the bottom of his ledger that had run red for years began, slowly, to run black. He told her so himself one December evening, leaning on the barn rail while she scattered feed for her birds along the stone path she had never once moved. "You saved me more this fall than I pay you in a year," he said. "I want you to know that. You're not a charity case on my books. You're the best money I spend." Mabel looked at her 8 birds finding their feed in the failing light, stone by stone, sure-footed in the dark, and she thought of a cull box on a tailgate and a man saying, "Those are free," and $10 folded into a hard square, and a door clicking shut behind her under a chipped sign. "They told me those birds were worthless," she said, "and this ground was worthless. And I expect a fair number of folks thought I was, too." "Folks stop looking close," Holcomb said, which was nearly word for word the cook's old line, though he'd never heard it, and Mabel felt something complete itself quietly inside her, a circle closing without a sound. "That's just it," she said. "Worth was there the whole time. Somebody just had to look." A year on, the sign at the orchard track read Boone in fresh paint, because Holcomb had let her name the lane and she had chosen her own name, the one nobody had given her, claimed at last. Beneath it she stood in boots that fit, holding not a paper sack but a feed bucket, and behind her the barn was warm and lit and hers, and the garden slept under straw, and along the stone path 8 steady hens came streaming at the sound of her step, sure in the dark, finding their way to her without once being able to see her, because she had stayed and made the world findable and never moved the things that mattered. She had spent $10 on 10 lives nobody wanted. It had bought her everything.